As we go, please don't be shy and don't be afraid. So we started off this little unit, if you will, with talking about the French Revolution, right? So the French Revolution is this really important time period. Can I speak a bit louder? Let me see if I can turn the mic up. Give me 1 second. Sorry, Dakota. Is that a little better, maybe? Hopefully. Hopefully the mic is going to be improved there. I just turned the volume up a little bit. So anyways, the French Revolution, right, is this pretty important time period, and a lot of Europe, what happens in Europe, today still kind of can stem all the way back to the French Revolution and the dealings that went on with the French Revolution, and ultimately the changes of the maps with Napoleon and the aftermath, right? So it all starts with our talk kind of about Louis XVI, right, and the Ancien regime in France. If you remember, we had said that the French had kind of had issues with debt thanks to helping the Americans during the American Revolution. And ultimately, this problem with money is going to lead to all sorts of problems throughout the country. You also have this tax system where the nobility and the clergy, who are the first and second estate here, they never really had to deal with that tax burden themselves, and most of that tax burden is going to be shouldered by the third estate, the commoners. And that's the case where the people with the most money aren't paying taxes. As a country, as a kingdom, they're going to have issues with not having money, right, and bankruptcy and things like that. There have been attempts to reform by Louis XVI and his people, but ultimately they failed, and when storms kind of came in as well in France and ruined a lot of the crops, you're going to have issues with money on top of widespread hunger, and the Enlightenment ideals that we'd also talked about are going to begin to kind of take root in France as well. So it kind of creates this perfect storm, if you will, right? So we talked about the three estates. You have the first estate is the clergy, the second estate is the nobility, right? The third estate is going to be meant to represent everybody else, and if you when it really comes down to it, we're talking like 98% or so is the third estate, and everybody, the other 2% kind of makes up the clergy and the nobility of the population in France, if it's even that high, right? So Louis XVI is going to call what's the Estates General, right, in May 1789, trying to deal with the economic crisis in France as well as the hunger issues, the famine and things, right? So they meet, and ultimately it doesn't go well kind of from the beginning, right? And effectively, the third estate is going to feel that they're not taken seriously, and they're going to kind of leave, right? And they're going to basically create what's called the National Assembly, and they're going to kind of say, well, if you guys aren't going to represent us, we're going to kind of do it ourselves, and we're going to exclude you guys, right? So in an attempt to block this, Louis XVI kind of tries to close down their meeting place, but that doesn't work because the third estate representatives, they find this indoor tennis court not that far from Versailles, and they go there and they swear this tennis court oath, and the idea is that they're not going to give up until they establish a French constitution that's going to protect the rights of the citizen, and eventually this is going to lead to what is known as the Declaration of the Rights of Man, right, and of the Citizen for the full name, and ultimately the first French constitution is going to come from this, right, in this pact here. So in response to this, King Louis XVI is going to kind of try to go after them a little bit, and they're going to send troops to Paris trying to quell uprisings from the food shortages in particular. He's going to actually get rid of his finance minister, a man named Jacques Necker, and effectively this is going to set off this big event in France known as the storming of the Bastille, right, which is essentially our American Independence Day, but in France, right? So on July 14th you celebrate Bastille Day in France, and you have a group, a mob, essentially, revolutionary mob that goes after the French, this prison known as the Bastille. They storm it. They end up taking a number of the guards, and they actually kill the governor of the prison and release the prisoners. And it's this big kind of sign of oppression from the monarchy of France, and it gets torn down brick by brick by the people, right? So not long after that, you have the Women's March on Versailles. With shortages of bread, these women are worried about this, of course, and there's rumors of grain and things like that being hoarded at Versailles. So they end up in long story short here, right, they go to Versailles, they seize King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, and force them to move to Paris to more closely watch over them, and they also raid the stores of grain and things like that, and try to, help feed their families, essentially, right? So in a long kind of chain of events, to keep it really simple here, you're going to have now Austria and Prussia trying to go to war with France in hopes to restore the monarchy. When King Louis XVI is going to be seen as encouraging the enemy, because, of course, why would he not? Why would he not, right? He's going to be kind of put in power again by these people. He wants that, right? So effectively, he's seen as encouraging this. He's going to be stripped of his power as king, right, by the National Assembly, and eventually tried and found guilty and sentenced to die by the guillotine, right? And this marks the beginning of the Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror is this period in France where you have what's known as the I can't think of it. It's the Committee of Public Safety. Oof, that was rough. Led by a man named Maximilien Robespierre. And this is going to kind of come after people, right? They're going to dub as enemies of the revolution. And this public safety committee is going to end up beheading a number of people who are innocent of a number of different things, just kind of everybody. No one is safe here under the reign of terror and Maximilien Robespierre. You have thousands of people being beheaded and killed in France as a result of this, and long story short, again, you're going to have a power struggle through the internal workings of this committee on public safety, and eventually Robespierre is going to be arrested himself and killed by guillotine as well. Anyway. So you are going to 1 second, next slide here. So that's kind of it for the French Revolution in a nutshell, right? So from there, you're going to kind of get a couple of years where things kind of devolve back into kind of craziness around the French Revolution, and eventually Napoleon will come to power himself, right? So let me get that one up here. Wrong side. Here we go. Okay, so Napoleon is going to be coming into power in France, but before we do that, let's talk about his background a little bit, right? So it's Napoleon Bonaparte. He is born Napoleon the Bonaparte. He's from Corsica, so it's this island kind of not that far off of Italy, to the west of Italy, kind of southeast of France here. He's going to be born in 1769 to minor Italian nobility, no one serious anyway. But he is going to kind of attend this military academy, and he is going to serve in the French army, and he's going to kind of work his way up the ranks in France, right? And work the way up in the military. And he is a military leader during the French Revolution, and with these wars with Austria and Prussia, really, he's going to kind of have some of these stunning victories during this time period and the wars that are going on, and he's going to gain popularity. And he's going to push into Egypt as well, and news of this is kind of kept under wraps when the Egyptian campaign doesn't necessarily go particularly well. Ultimately, in 1799, he is going to carry out a coup d'etat, and he's going to seize power and overthrow what's known as the Directory at this point, eventually gain so much power he's going to kind of declare himself the Emperor of the French, right? So we go this roundabout way of getting rid of the absolute monarchy through the revolution in France, and we kind of end up with a similar deal a couple years later, right? So at the outbreak of the revolution, he is this lieutenant, right? And he is a supporter of some of these more extreme revolutionaries, and ultimately his military successes are going to move him into the political scene, right? So when he gets his power, what is he ultimately trying to do? And the answer to that really is to kind of try to unify Europe under French dominion, right? And he's going to end up in war with all, or really most of the European powers at the time. He's going to end up in war with England and Prussia, Austria, Russia, Sweden, Portugal. All of these countries are going to kind of end up at war with Napoleon in certain times, right? So you can see on this map, the French Empire, and he's going to be kind of going against Prussia, Austria-Hungary, Russia. You got Sweden up here, right? So all these countries are countries that he is going to kind of go after to some extent in his attempts to unify France, Europe under French rule. So, okay, so Napoleon's in power now, and in 1801 he's going to lose what is the colony of Saint Domingue at this point, which is actually it's Haiti, right? The Haitian Revolution is going to be taking place, and effectively he's not going to be able to kind of reclaim it. He's going to give up on any sort of territorial claims in the Americas, and any potential future empire in the Americas, and he's going to concentrate on Europe. He's going to sell the Louisiana Territory to the United States for about $15 million. This takes place in 1803. You'll learn more about that next year in American history. But he takes that money and he puts it into the war effort against these other countries, right? So you're going to have Britain, Russia, Austria, Sweden all join forces against Napoleon. And Napoleon, with his military strategy and military genius, is actually going to do very well against these people, right? He's going to force Austria, Russia, and Sweden to kind of sign peace treaties, stopping their engagement at this point in these wars, right? In 1805, you're going to have this famous Battle of Trafalgar, which is going to kind of ensure British naval superiority. And this defeat of Napoleon's forces, Napoleon has to give up invading Britain, right? And he's going to have to look for other ways to maybe do this. So with this success elsewhere on the continent, right, while not having control of Britain really, you're going to have Portugal, Sweden, the Ottomans, right, and he's going to kind of install his own rulers, puppet rulers, and sometimes family members, on the throne in some of these countries, and create alliances with others, and France is going to expand greatly. Largest extent kind of between 1807 and 1812 of the French Empire, right? And ultimately he's going to get a bit cocky, right? And with what's called the Grand Army, right? You're going to have this kind of first truly nationalized army of France, and you're going to have 400,000 men or so begin in 1812 what's called the Russian campaign, right? The Napoleon's Russian campaign, and effectively the entire way, it's just not going to do well, right? He's going to kind of end up there and stuck in there kind of in the winter, and it's just Russia in the winter. It's just not a good place to be, right? The cold and the brutal conditions and Russia's scorched earth policy kind of destroying food stores and things like that in front of Napoleon's army. So Napoleon's going to enter with about 420-something thousand into Russia, and just about 5 months later or so, he's going to return. He's going to leave Russia with only 10,000 people, right? So in this grand army truly was grand and this impressive sight to see, is going to kind of meet its match in Russia and the Russian winter and Russian weather and such, and effectively mount to nothing by the end of it. So this is just another map to kind of show size and scale, right? So it's kind of, it's going to get thinner and thinner, the line here, all the way until it's back in Russia. Back out of Russia, sorry. So, defeated in Russia, right, they had used this scorched earth policy, and he had been super successful all the way until this point. And he is going to be what's called exiled to what's called Elba. And Elba is where he's going to kind of be exiled to at first. And he's going to be exiled there for a little while, and effectively he's going to get himself off of this, right? He's going to get himself out of Elba. He's going to end up in what's called the 100 Days. He's going to end up back in France, reclaim the throne, recreate this new army, and begin a new campaign in Europe as well. He's going to be defeated at what is called Waterloo. And effectively, at this point, the European powers, while attending the Congress of Vienna, is going to declare him exiled to what's called St. Helena. I'm writing these in the chat here. So those are, that's where he's going to end up, right? So Napoleon was this larger-than-life figure, for sure, that's going to do, quite incredible things in Europe, and ultimately his downfall will be his kind of ego on some level, right? So Elba is off the coast of Italy right there, and St. Helena is out in the Atlantic. So after the first time, they learn their lesson. They're going to kind of push him way out in the Atlantic, where he's going to die just, I think it's like 5 or 6 years later. So what's his legacy, right? Ultimately, it's an unsuccessful attempt to unify Europe, right, under this French domination. But the big thing is this Napoleonic Code, right? It's going to be this new law code that comes from it. This whole idea of citizens equal, under the law. It doesn't matter your upbringing and your birth, right? It's a meritocracy on some level, that if you have merit and you effectively are good at what you do, you can move up in the world, right? It's going to be fairly religious tolerant, right? So as he kind of moves into these areas, he's going to kind of let them continue to be themselves to some extent, and be tolerant of these peoples, right? He's pro-business. He restores Catholicism in France after the craziness of the revolution, as a kind of some semblance of normalcy and stability. He's going to establish a national banking system. He's going to establish public schools for people. Right, all of these things are super important modern type things that we can talk about. Whereas when you had, the absolute rulers, you didn't necessarily get a lot of these things, right? So, otherwise his legacy, is this whole idea of awakening national pride, right? This whole contributed growth of nationalism, and these things, right? He replaced the King of Spain with his brother, sets off rebellions in Spanish America, which is we're going to be talking about going forward as well. Many of this new Spain and Portugal, are gonna, these colonies in South America are gonna gain independence ultimately, right? And lastly, he's gonna kind of turn it into this centralized state with the Constitution. You're gonna have elections. Suffrage is going to be greatly expanded, though still somewhat limited as well. All of these things are important things that Napoleon's going to do, right? You're going to have more citizens with property and access to education. French citizens are going to lose. They had lost many rights promised to them during the conventions. But anyway, you also have the abolition of the Holy Roman Empire. They're going to this losing the Holy Roman Empire is going to lead to the different kingdoms in Germany and the eventual unification of Germany, not in the distant future here, not so distant future here. You're also going to get just the Louisiana Territory to America. It's going to double the size of the United States, which is also a relatively important thing to remember. Okay, so our last bit here is on the Congress of Vienna. So we did this just the other day, so I don't imagine we need to go too in depth here. To keep this kind of efficient and there's no one asking any questions. But I think at this point, now is the time to kind of bring up what the extra credit question will be tomorrow. So the extra credit question I'm going to ask is something just really interesting. I saw one just a couple of years ago, and if you ever get the chance, I'm going to suggest you also get the opportunity. But the extra credit question is going to be, what year will the next total solar eclipse be in the United States? So I will tell you the answer is 2024, and it's going to be kind of working its way up. Well, I'll just bring it up on the screen here. Why not? This next solar eclipse will be working its way up from Texas on April 8th, and it's going to kind of work its way up through, you got Arkansas, you got Illinois and Indiana, Ohio, you got New York State, it looks like northern Vermont, New Hampshire, and ultimately Maine, right, in the United States. So if you ever get the opportunity, I would suggest going to see a total solar eclipse. The next one that would be super accessible in the United States looks like it might be either 2023 on the western coast there. Actually, that's in not total eclipse, sorry. The next total solar eclipse would be the 2045, which is kind of a bit of a deal away after that point. So anyway, back to our topic here. So, Congress of Vienna, right? We just did this activity for some of you today, and otherwise we went over it the other day for the evening classes. But Napoleon's going to be exiled to Saint Helena, and they need to decide what they're going to do, right? And should they keep a lot of these reforms or undo them? What's going to be the best case? Napoleon had redrawn the map of Europe. You got the Confederation of the Rhine and such, which you saw on your maps, and how are we going to redo this, or should we redo this at all? And that's going to be the questions that are going to be answered, right? So, at the Congress of Vienna, meeting in the Austrian Empire, you're going to have the 5 great powers of Europe at the time. You have Austria, Russia, Prussia, Great Britain, France, right? France being included at all is kind of a big deal because they are the losing power here, and they're going to kind of be able to have some sort of voice, which is kind of important for them because they're going to try to limit their losses here, right? So, what's kind of decided? Effectively, the Congress of Vienna is this attempt by these great powers to restore normalcy to Europe the way they see it, right? They're fairly conservative with their ideas, and effectively, they want to restore the monarchy. They want to undo all of the craziness of the revolution and kind of bring it back to the way it was before the French Revolution and the Napoleonic conquests, right? So the hope is this balance of power. You're going to have these strong countries around France is going to kind of prevent any future French aggression, and that they'd even be maybe allied together to kind of stop it if it ever happens again, right? France had been kind of causing problems for almost 20-something years at that point, and they really were fed up with it, right? So the whole hope was that no country would be a threat to another because they would all be similar strength, right? They're going to redraw the map, so they want to redraw it kind of take advantage for themselves to get kind of some territory that they believed they were owed due to how they're dealing with Napoleon, and they wanted to restore dethroned monarchs to their thrones. Again, restoring the monarchy, kind of restoring the status quo in Europe, if you will, right? So you kind of have the map here. You have the Rhine, Confederation of the Rhine and such, and you're going to kind of have some territory that's going to be kind of all over the place after it, with people kind of taking what they can, the Austrian Empire and Prussia and Russia and such, right? So, we talked about some political philosophies emerging, right? The whole idea of conservatism at this time, conservatism is going to be, again, not wanting change as much as they can. So these are most of the nobility and the monarchs, and they want to keep their power that they had prior to the revolution altogether, right? They don't want things to change, or they want to bring them back to the way they were, right? Make France great again, I suppose. You're also going to have this idea of liberalism, right? And at this point, liberalism is usually kind of merchants and middle class people who could make things and such, and they liked some of the changes of the revolution because they saw themselves getting a little more power. They were being enfranchised and given the ability to vote. They liked parliaments. They wanted parliaments to limit the power of the nobility and the monarchs and to have some say and power themselves, right? They liked these ideas. They desired the change, some of the changes that came about, right? So you're going to kind of get the clash of conservatism versus liberalism that's going to be going forward. And you'll lastly have what's called radicalism, right? And it's just this extreme version, if you will, of liberalism where it can be anybody, but really it's this favor of extreme change really quickly, favoring this change, equality for all, the ideals of the French Revolution and the Enlightenment to really take hold, right? So you get this idea of nationalism and the whole question of what is a nation, right? And the nation is going to come around this idea of a community of people who share common characteristics like language and religion and culture, in certain areas, in territory and land. And it's going to be a huge driving force of European politics during the 1800s, the 19th century. And nationalism itself is this desire for loyalty and devotion to their country, right? They're going to be starting to be devoted to the idea of this country more so than a king or empire, right? And it's going to again create this whole political scene during the 1800s, of countries and nation states and people looking to kind of create their own identity for their country. And also some areas that had an identity the way they saw it, but then they were underrepresented or they didn't feel that they had a voice, and looking to be able to create their own identity in their own country, right? So a nation state is a nation, right? These common characteristics, these areas that own an independent government. So in some cases, you can have a nation, right, on some level, but if you don't have a government that's able to represent itself on the world stage, then you don't have a nation state, right? So a lot of things are going to lead to the rise of this. You're going to have the Congress of Vienna, different ethnic groups being spread out, as a result of redrawing the maps. The whole ideas of the revolution and the Enlightenment and democracy, and just the whole idea of national pride, right? All of these things are going to kind of come to head here during the 1900s, and it's going to lead to what we're going to be talking about next, which is imperialism and colonies, and effectively the whole lead and run up to World War I in the early 1900s. Right, you have different types of nationalistic movements. Unification is bringing culturally similar groups together to unite and form one country. And then you have separation, where you have a culturally distinct group trying to break away to form its own country with their own unique identity, right? We talked about Kurdistan in southeast Turkey, northwest Iran and Iraq. You also have the Basques in France, right? And all of these political dealings, right, and these sentiments of nationalism, and still the ideals of the Enlightenment, you're going to get kind of some unsuccessful revolutions in the year 1848 in several different European countries. You're going to have, this map is going to kind of show some clashes here in areas where you're going to have some uprisings that aren't necessarily successful because of the successes of the restoration of conservatism in these areas, right? And ultimately, the last thing we talked about here is England, right? And England being spared revolution because England was a little bit different, right? They'd gone through some of this stuff earlier. They didn't have an absolute monarch anymore, especially after Charles I, right? You're going to have expanded political rights through voting and legislation and the parliament, and ultimately, England is going to even be one of the first countries here to abolish slavery completely through the British Empire, right? So that's, again, makings of a modern ideologies here. And England's kind of a little bit ahead of the curve, which is one of the reasons why it didn't go through a lot of the same revolutionary fervor that, say, France did. Okay? So that said, I think that's kind of all the material we ran through anyway, so I don't know. Without any questions, I think we are just about ready to call it a night. So unless you have a question, you can kind of give you another minute or so to put it into the chat. So Wilson, there will be about probably 35 questions again. So again, similar length to the quizzes that we've had before. Remember, you will not be able to retake the quizzes, but you will be allowed to do corrections on the quizzes. So just generally speaking, guys, don't forget that your project is due. Your project will be due for Thursday, basically the last day of this week. The last day before break for your class is when your project is due, so don't please neglect that. Yeah, great. Okay, so if there's no last questions, I think we'll call it. I'll leave you guys to your studying, and that'll be that. So have a good night, guys. Good luck, and I will see you either tomorrow or Wednesday at this point.